I'll just tell you a little bit about Maria, for those of you who don't know her. Maria is the Director of the Northern Ireland office of the Dementia Services Development Centre and has worked for the University of Stirling, where the centre is based, since 2007. Maria has a background in occupational therapy and has worked as both a clinician and a manager in acute hospital care, general adult mental health services and psychiatry of old age. She has been a registered occupational therapist since 1986. She has extensive consultancy experience on design of the built environment for people with dementia and contributed to the development of the Design for Dementia audit tool. She is co-author of Hearing, Sound and the Acoustic Environment for People with Dementia, which was published in 2010. So, as you'll know, she has a wealth of expertise, and we're very much looking forward to her presentation on the findings from the Life and Time Survey on attitudes to dementia. The format is that Maria will speak for about half an hour, and then you have an opportunity to add your comments, thoughts, questions for a little while afterwards. And at the very end of the session, we have some sandwiches and tea at the back of the room where you can continue to engage Maria, or indeed Paula, or any of us in discussion afterwards. So you're very welcome, and thank you very much, Maria.
Thanks, Gillian. This survey has been incredibly exciting for us. It gets at the underbelly of some of the big issues that we know are there and that are problematic. Attitudes and stigma can be incredibly disabling for people with dementia in terms of getting on and living their lives. And one of the things that we're really invested in is raising the bar on people's expectations for how well people can live. And don't forget that that's us. Before very long, that's us. Okay. This is a picture of the Milky Way, and you'd be kind of wondering, well, how come we're talking about dementia and we're looking at a picture of the Milky Way? There is a connection. There are estimated to be about 14 billion stars in the Milky Way. These funky guys are neurons in our brain. Once the French got at them and put nice colours on them and stuck them under a microscope. And the connection between those two things are that there are estimated to be about 14 billion neurons in our brains. And we've put this slide in because while the neurons all look the same and ostensibly have the same functions, the different areas of the brain have different jobs to do. And it is the synergy of these different areas actually cooperating, collaborating and working together that make us who we are, that make us people who have interests, who have hobbies, who are able to perform roles and jobs and tasks and functions and do all those fancy things, from cooking the dinner to writing books and undertaking fancy research. So we're pretty impressive, and we all have that capacity. Now, when a form of dementia kicks in for a person, all of that begins to change because it doesn't affect everybody the same way. We are all individuals. How many people does that affect? Well, in the UK, there are currently estimated to be 750,000 people, and that should be 2021. Within 10 years, rising to 1 million people. In Northern Ireland, currently 19,000 people, and expecting to triple but within 40 years, primarily because of the shift in demographics. And within Northern Ireland, that's a proportionally higher rate of increase than in other places in the UK. And it's because, for now, primarily our birth rate is falling that bit faster than other areas in the UK. But still, many, many people, and much for us to deal with. Globally, 36 million and doubling every 20 years, so that will be 66 million by 2030. Okay, reminder, the different parts of the brain do different jobs. Dementia is an umbrella term, and I know that some of you will know this, but quite often people think dementia and they think Alzheimer's disease. 50% of the people who have a form of dementia will have Alzheimer's disease, followed quickly by about 20% of the people having vascular or multi-infarct dementia, which is associated with strokes, and about 20% as well having Lewy body type dementia, which looks a bit like Parkinson's disease because it's a similar part of the brain that's affected. The next biggie for us in Northern Ireland is alcohol-related brain disease. And you don't need me to tell you what our relationship as a culture is with alcohol, and particularly I think through the future that's going to be worrying. The good news on that is, in particular for alcohol-related brain disease and vascular dementia, there are modifiable risk factors, but we're going to come back to that. Really important for us to remember that it's not just about memory. These forms of disease and these conditions affect other things about how we function. So it makes learning new things hard. It makes reasoning and solving problems hard. And we become particularly susceptible to the impacts of stress and anxiety when we have these kind of impairments, because we lose confidence. In addition to just the genuine struggle that people have when they are experiencing failures with brain function. So the disabilities that people experience are as a result of what's happening in the brain, as well as what's happening for somebody in their social and built environment. So we can't necessarily stop what's happening in the brain, but we can do things about the social and the built environment. And talking about this research, one of the big things is about public attitudes, and we certainly can do something about that. Okay. Another reminder just about the impact of what the world actually may feel like from the perspective of the person with dementia. There are big issues around grief and depression, anxiety, despair and terror that come with that diagnosis. Again, I would draw your attention to the opportunity we have to impact upon that. These are things that are also genuine fears for people, but they are essentially modifiable as well, changed by how we react, changed by how we respond. So people with dementias are at increased risk, not only of the deterioration in their cognition, but also the impacts of a loss of socialisation, decreases in interaction, more susceptible to depression, more likely to be alienated, isolated, and agitated as a result. Okay. Moving then to the significance, particular significance about the actual survey. Really good cohort of people responding here, just over 1,200 respondents aged 18 or over. And we looked then at exploring the knowledge and attitudes in relation to dementia within Northern Ireland. And the module funded by the Atlantic Philanthropies. 45% of the respondents knew someone who had a dementia, and most of them were family members. So really interesting that there's quite a high uptake amongst people who have real first-hand experience. A quarter of those were aged under 35, and almost half were aged 35 or older. Okay, so what is it then that people told us that they knew about dementia? That it's a disease of the brain, and this is good news that people are beginning, that they understand that, and that's a clear fact that people have in their minds. But also that people consider it to be a mental illness, which is not true as such. Also that a significant number of people thought that it was part of the normal ageing process. It is not. These are things that we need to challenge, because it's really important for us to understand that there is a disease process going here. The underlying thing is, if people think it's part of the normal ageing process, then they think there's nothing can be done. And we buy in too quickly into some sense of, well, that's the way it is. And it needn't be like that. We can raise the bar and raise people's expectations on this. People thought that dementia is another term for Alzheimer's disease. Covered that already. 50% of the people who have a form of dementia will have Alzheimer's disease. And that gives you that slow, gradual progression through the condition. About a third of the people have the message that eating healthily and exercise is one of the key things that will help us to remain well longer. And the other piece of good news alongside that is that actually if we are already diagnosed with a form of dementia, exercise is a really, really good thing to be doing in terms of keeping us well longer and shoring up our underlying physical and mental and emotional well-being. So a really important message within that. There are drug treatments that help with dementia, but there's something to be really balanced and managed in that message, I think, in people's awareness. People can place a lot of desire for drugs to deliver a cure. They can place a lot of hope that there will be a drug cure, when the reality of it is we're going to have a lot of people living with this condition for a long time. And my question is, what is it that we have to do to make the ride a happier one? What is it that we have to do to shore up people's quality of life? If we buy too heavily into a notion that a drug that we don't yet have will deliver the answer, we're missing an opportunity to do something in the here and now that makes life significantly different. 72% of people understood that there are many different types of dementia. That's good news. That's a fact. It's important that people understand that. What they probably know a little less about is then if you have one form of dementia, what are the big key things that we need to be doing? So there's a big education role for us. And if I give you an example, the people with Lewy body type dementia are very, very, very highly sensitized to psychotropic medication. And that's another way of saying that when people give antipsychotics or anxiolytics, the kind of drugs to sedate people, then this group are really very highly at risk of being very physically compromised by that, and in some cases they will have a fatal impact upon them. But there's been much written about that, so that's another big message that in the longer term we need to work on. Okay, describing dementia then. What is it people know, or what have they told us about how they would describe dementia? So a lot of very accurate information. The reality of it is that for somebody living with dementia, all of these things belong to them to a greater or lesser degree. As they do to any of us here in this space, they also belong to us. It's not difficult to empathise with people feeling confused and frightened and lost, maybe behaving in unpredictable ways as a result of those things. But I noticed from this list that the kind of things like kind, happy, gentle fun were things that people did not associate with people with dementia. So, you know, there is a big job of work to be done in terms of really challenging those perceptions that sit behind the ways that we describe these conditions. And actually an important message for us as well about the language we use, the discourse we use. You'll notice that I say again and again, people with dementia, people living with dementia, not sufferers, not victims. It's not to say that there isn't genuine suffering. There is genuine suffering. But also, if we are to really challenge these perceptions, we need to challenge that kind of thing. We need to look at the other things that really add quality to life. So what are people saying then about living with dementia? Actually, I'm going to, if I might, go back to that previous slide, because I just love this. And these are people with dementia. All of the pictures and all of the photographs that we use throughout this are people, ordinary people, from ordinary families who live with dementia and are out doing things, biting the backside out of life, if you like. So it's worth drawing attention to that. Okay, so what people said then about living with dementia, and again, bearing in mind that 50% almost of the cohort were saying, well, we do live with people who have dementia. There is an underlying message of despair and fear and despondency that comes with many of these statements, and I'll draw your attention in particular to, there comes a time when all you can do for someone with dementia is to keep them clean, healthy and safe. And once they have dementia, the person you knew eventually it disappears. As soon as someone is diagnosed with dementia, they are not treated like a thinking human being anymore. So, quite nihilistic views sitting behind that. Other people take over and making decisions for people with dementia far too much. There's an ambivalence sitting behind that statement. Bearing in mind that the people who responded are family members, there's a kind of an ambivalence sitting with that statement. It's kind of saying, well, we'd like our people with dementia to make decisions for themselves, but actually we're maybe just a bit ambivalent about that, and we'd like, we're not so sure that that's a good idea. Let's look at that in more detail and think about it. What I was really blown away with on this slide was that people with dementia should be involved in activities in the community. 87%, yes, 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 more please. We in Northern Ireland have a higher proportion of our old people with dementia living in nursing and residential homes than anywhere else in the UK. One of the underlying reasons for that is that when a crisis happens, people feel they have no alternative. One of the things that would really make a difference is preventing the crisis in the first place. If we had an infrastructure of community-based support systems that actually shore up those carers, shore up those people with dementia, support them to engage socially and remain being out there, having things to do, people to see, places to go, then we can keep them well and out of nursing and residential homes for significantly longer. So I was really heartened to see that there is an underpinning view coming from the people who responded that they want that too, and they think it's a good thing. Scenarios by time. This is one of my favourite photographs. I find it incredibly moving, because we know what the direction of travel is for these people, but guess what? The big news is it's the direction of travel for us all. That sooner or later we're going to become incredibly vulnerable. We may well need to be cared for, and we all know what the end point is. Look at those faces and look at the genuine contact between those people. When we asked in the survey about how people responded across 4 scenarios in terms of being just diagnosed or diagnosed a long time, and we asked about the scenarios about someone living alone, managing medication, driving, and the use of electronic tags, you can see there that you know, there's a drift. When people are just diagnosed, almost 40% of the people who respond is saying probably or definitely not living alone. Probably or definitely not. So you start to see the momentum pushing up behind someone to say, oh no, this is not an option anymore. Encouragingly, 35% of the people are saying, well, that depends. Okay, so there's a wee bit of wriggle room within that. And it does depend. It depends on us having a good infrastructure. It depends on there being good information. It depends on the point at which people actually get diagnosed. You know, if you're diagnosed early, then the opportunity to really engage and be involved in making decisions and staying on top of the condition is there with you for significantly longer. If we can get people diagnosed early and get them through the genuine grief and despair that goes with the diagnosis of that, then we can start to work on rebuilding self-esteem, confidence, helping people to manage the stress and anxiety that further compromise them. Interestingly, the issues around medication and driving also, you know, so there are a lot of slippage in here around autonomy, about the locus of control, who decides on when, and so on. So, I mean, it's not to really make too many judgments about the basis upon which people made the choices that they did. But it's just to draw attention that we could make quite a paradigm shift on the dynamics behind people's thinking that rests really on attitude. Once people are diagnosed a long time, you start to see quite a startling difference there in terms of the issues around living alone, managing medication. And yes, the reality of it is these are people who become increasingly dependent on different types of support. But it doesn't tell us what the opportunities are there. It doesn't describe what the kind of different factors are that you might take into consideration. For example, when you're using electronic tags. So there's a bit of enthusiasm around the use of electronic tags. And what I can tell you is, interestingly, Northern Ireland is a fantastic place in terms of being at the leading edge of developing electronic assistive technology, in particular for this group. Amongst the academics that I have met, I'm really heartened by and impressed by how much emphasis they put on the ethical decision making that is behind, because we can invent a gadget for anything, but actually what they're saying is big things that need to be thought about: who benefits, who does this serve, what's appropriate, who's deciding, who has capacity to consent, at what point do we say, well, we need to review this situation. Do we need to tweak it? Do we need to change it? Who decides that we withdraw something, and who decides what happens next? So the really complex decision-making process that goes on behind that. But interestingly, that whole issue of electronic tagging is basically, it's not that different in people's attitude from the just diagnosed to the diagnosed a long time. I think that's fascinating. I think also where we can be very gadget-driven, and there's a real danger in that, and a real danger in being marketing driven by those things. So it might be worth having a hook around that. I think there's a rich seam around the whole issue of assistive technology in the longer term, maybe something worthwhile to explore. Conclusions are that this survey of attitudes flagged up things that need to be addressed really in the longer term around public policies, about how we design and deliver care and services. Big issues around public awareness, and that also includes us. I mean, there are a lot of well-informed people in this room, but actually I think there's so much more that we can do, and I think there's a huge opportunity for us to do stuff together to bring momentum. Real issue for me is that Northern Ireland is such a dinky size that actually we could give momentum to this stuff. We could make this the best place in the world to be an old person with dementia. And that's the kind of aspiration I have. I'm ambitious about that. Because it's manageable. We have a lot of bright people. We have a lot of innovative stuff happening. And I think they could do better. But guess what? That's not a criticism. It's saying, let's go for it. Big things around support and information for people with dementia and their carers. We know so little about what the direct experience of living with this condition actually is, and we don't presume to ask all that often. Okay, good news messages from the survey. 94% of respondents know that dementia is a progressive brain disease. 87% think that people with dementia should be involved in activities with the community. Other things must do better. Absolutely the issue of stigma. Absolutely the issue of access to care. And challenge the false belief that nothing can be done. Just because we don't have a cure, just because there isn't a magic pill, it is so not the case that nothing can be done. Doesn't mean it's easy. Some of it is. Actually, that's the other piece of good news in this. And we need to bring dementia out of the shadows. But actually, I'm on the other side of the fence on that too. I'm on the side of being a bit more proactive about that and saying, let's pursue this and shine a light into a few of the dark corners on this whole issue and go poking around. Must do better. Absolutely improve the information for carers of people with dementia and raise expectations about what can be done. Not only from the point of view of sometimes when we say things like raising expectations, we kind of think it's all about what the other guy has to do. You know, social services have to do better, or you know, the voluntary sector has to do better, or the health service has to do better, or the minister has to do better, or and what I'm saying is actually we also need to have higher expectations for ourselves. If I am the next person with dementia diagnosed with that, I want to be biting the backside out of life until the last minute. And I want, actually, if it happens to be somebody I care about very deeply, I want to be able to care for them better and do better by them in between. So it's raising the expectations in the way that, for example, 30 years ago, people had very low expectations and were, you know, felt completely despondent and despairing when someone received a diagnosis of cancer. We still have lots of different forms of cancers. We still have people dying and receiving those diagnoses. It's harrowing. I have been there in terms of caring for somebody who went through that process. It didn't mean that there wasn't something worth living for every day. And in a way, that's the paradigm shift. That's the direction of travel. This is where we really need to be going. Huge, huge, huge indicator from this survey was around paternalistic views of people with dementia. So, you know, you get the diagnosis and actually that's fine. The rest of us will take over making the decisions from here on in. Thanks very much. And by the way, you're a burden. And everything we say and every way in which we respond to you will reinforce that for you. And we really need to challenge that in lots of ways, by raising the expectations of how good the quality of life can actually be on the one hand. But also, you know, I really react badly to this notion of a burden. You know, we have huge industries in this country that are delivering care for old people and people with dementia. Huge industries, nursing homes, residential homes, people who work in the health service, academics, you know, the GPs, all earning a crust out of caring for this. We have an obligation to deliver by doing it better, actually. The majority of us are living off public money and earning a crust in that way. So could we really also reciprocate by doing the best possible job there is to do? Other things that we must do better, addressing the modifiable risk factors and getting the good news out there. This is stuff that people generally do not know. They know it for heart disease, they know it for diabetes, they know it for cardiac disease. Can we just tell people that if they're doing all of that, they're doing a really good job in terms of protecting themselves, you know, against certain forms of dementia on the one hand, but actually also that if you happen to be diagnosed, these are still really good things to be doing. And likewise, the meaningful activities, and I've said it already, having places to go, people to see, and things to do is really, really good for us. Matches in with the social networks, and then the good news on the alcohol intake is we can have some, not too much, but we can have some, and red wine in modest quantities. So the thing to do is to have a little every day, and don't be going on the blarge at the weekends or and so on. Exercise, really, really good evidence for exercise. Look at those faces, aren't they great in that picture? Okay, what we must do. And in some ways, some of the underlying big messages coming out of this survey are telling us that we really have to get on the ball and diagnose early. Hands together and applaud Northern Ireland. We are doing better than anywhere else in the UK. Recent survey by the Alzheimer's Society indicated that more people are being diagnosed in Northern Ireland proportionally than elsewhere in the UK. But that's because somehow or another our services are getting on top of that. It means that we've got to do other things now. We've got to get the services in place, and we've got to respond to that, and we've got to challenge the attitudes and inform people well and thoroughly, and teach them and share what it is we know about these conditions. We absolutely have got to inform people with dementia themselves. Correspondingly, we've got to really listen to people with dementia. I think the single biggest thing that will change attitudes and inform how we do what we do through to the future with what we've got in terms of the available resource has got to be shaped by what it is that people with dementia and their carers tell us from their own perspective and from their expertise. And we have an obligation to get our act together behind the scenes and sort it out. And really be willing to learn from people with dementia. We do not know enough about what this is about. So I like it that we're ahead of the game in terms of the diagnosis, but there's other stuff that we need to get on and do now, and really getting on the ball and listening to what it is that people with dementia actually have to tell us is the important thing. This is the last slide. The success of our job should be governed by enhanced quality of life for people with dementia. And look at those ladies. I think they're great. I don't have anything else to say just now, unless you have questions.
Thank you very much.
Maybe we put the ladies up again.
Thank you very much, Maria, for taking us through a lot of very interesting data in a very clear way. I'm sure many of you maybe do have comments or questions or observations that you'd like to share with Maria or put out there. So please feel free to
ask for it.
Oh, sorry, we have a mic because we're recording the seminar for the web. If anybody does want to ask a question or make a comment, can they just wait till the mic comes to them? So. Yeah, the lady at the front.
No, it's just very...
Sorry, just wait for the mic, please. Thank you.
I actually thought it was very interesting there that we in Northern Ireland diagnosed the dementia earlier and tell the person, because I had an interesting visitor the other day in work where a gentleman came in, 67 years of age, just been diagnosed with dementia. I had never met this gentleman before, but he was up visiting his mother-in-law. And it was because I hadn't met anybody so young with dementia and just been diagnosed with the disease. I was able to ask him how he felt about it, and he was able to tell me his fears for the future and things that he's unable to do now. But his wife didn't understand this, you know. But his fear, and somebody actually told him he shouldn't have went up to the home. It wouldn't have been good for him. He says, why would it not be good for me? I know I'm going to end up like this. But he actually talked to me for about an hour before I brought him right back round to his wife.
Can I ask you what your work or what your organisation is?
So I'm a senior care assistant in an EMI residential home for dementia, but usually I'm set to usually be the later stage of dementia, and people are older, but we are getting them in younger. But we've never had anybody that just been diagnosed and knew they had dementia and was able to talk about the dementia, and was able to talk about their fears, and was able to talk about their past life when he didn't realise he had it before he was diagnosed, and didn't realise he was making mistakes until he heard somebody talking about him. They didn't know how long they were going to cover up. This man had a really good job, but was obviously making a lot of mistakes. You know, and he actually took quite sick after that, because he was out of work for a year. When he heard that, he was hurt, he was annoyed. And it wasn't until recently, it was so dramatic for him. it wasn't until recently had been diagnosed. But obviously he's never been up in the home before. He felt the need to talk to somebody that knew about dementia, and that's what made him visit. His wife always visited, he didn't visit. But it was quite interesting listening to him talking, and yes, I feel we need to listen to people that has just been diagnosed of dementia.
Absolutely.
You know.
It's, I mean, there's a real, sorry, I'll come to you in a wee second, there's a real need to get alongside somebody and support them very urgently and very quickly through the shock and the trauma and the upset that that brings, and really support them through that to get
I've worked in this home 30
place.
years now, as in saying we're dealing, you know, with people in the later stages, you know, and to meet this gentleman, like, I mean, it was an education for me. It was definitely an education for me, you know, but I was glad to be on board for somebody he was able to talk to, a stranger. He might not have been able to talk to his wife. He's trying to protect her still, but he's also, you can see the depression setting in, you know. He can't do the things she's asked him to do things, you know. But, you know, and he was saying about the colours and schemes, the way they affect him, and how readings affected him, and lots of things that people take for granted affect his way of life. It's very frustrating.
And many things that you're saying there are things that we could do something about.
Yes, so easily. It doesn't cost money to do things about. It's to listen and to respond.
But also do some practical things, you know, because the reality of it is, you know, things like colours or, you know, the design of the built environment really has a huge impact on as to whether it disables somebody or enables them. And we know
we're
an awful
aware of
lot
that
about
in the home
that.
because we have changed some of our colour schemes and that, you know, to suit people with dementia, you know, especially like in the bathrooms where they couldn't recognise the toilet because it's up against the cream wall, you know, and things like that, you know, different colour schemes, and that's more beneficial. But listen to this gentleman, he didn't realise how much colours did affect. You know, he could also paint and decorate and can't do it any longer because the colours are affected.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll maybe come back to that. I think there's a couple of other comments wanting to come in.
I was just going to say, at this minute in time, I'm actually managing the place where Anne works, in a residential home. But I'm actually a manager of a day centre, and I can see the difference between people coming in from a day centre, as Janet, at a very maybe early stage, and then right through the later stage, and going into residential where you're getting people at a very late stage. And I know you commented on we're diagnosing early, and within sort of daycare, certainly people coming in are very unaware about diagnosis, and they're not.
See,
you know, you know that Northern Ireland probably is shining, but I feel there's an awful lot more can be done as far as diagnosis.
I mean,
goes.
and I don't know that diagnosing lots of people means that it's being done early. You know, either it's like we have a better rate of diagnosis. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're getting to people at an early enough stage. So I wouldn't kind of necessarily be too quick to run them two things together. I think the other thing to say is it's one thing to get people a diagnosis. We do need things sitting in the wings, really able to support people through that process. And organisations like the Alzheimer's Society are critical in that. But also is an attitude whereby, you know, it's worthwhile counselling and supporting these people. It is a trauma.
This lady here, just pass the mic.
Elizabeth Byrne-McCulloch from the Alzheimer's Society. Thanks, Maria, for that fantastic presentation, really very interesting. I find lots to be positive and encouraged about from your results, and some of it is deeply depressing, and you were probably deeply depressed about the same things. I think it's probably, this shows to me kind of huge inclination of the population that you surveyed there, you know, quite a considerable inclination to rush to the control, the quick fix, the tag, both figurative and mental and metaphorical. I think, you know, we have this need to sort of sort things out in whatever kind of neat ways we see as being, you know, to the benefit of people who haven't dementia. currently, but may have in the future. I think also this is reflected very much in maybe it's in our society. It's deeply ingrained. We're very kind of, you know, controlling, kind of right-wing, kind of, you know, traditional approaches to things, but also that was reflected maybe somewhat in our legislators and our people who are making decisions at policy level at the top. And I see that as a huge, huge issue in terms of, you know, I mean, even in the developing capacity legislation, we can see that they are racing to substitute decision making rather than supporting people with dementia to make decisions while they can for now and for the future, and also providing advocates so that people can be properly appraised and informed of things that they can decide on, and to make sure those things are properly documented. I think this is a big, big problem, but I'm very encouraged by some of those findings from the survey, that people are they're knowing more about dementia. We all need to understand more about dementia, and also not to shy away from people who have it. And I think that's a big, big piece of work for the Alzheimer's Society and for all of us here who are interested in dementia, to make sure that people don't add isolation and exclusion to an already very complex and very profound impact of a very serious condition. But thank you for that. It was really interesting.
I think one of the big things that gives me hope about it all is that we do see people, as you say, rightly say, and you know this world well, as I know, rush in. And you've rightly drawn attention to things like the process of development of the capacity legislation. What gives me hope, mind you, is that the better informed people become, it calls on a good place in people here, because fundamentally people are motivated by wanting to do the right thing. Fundamentally people want to care well. Their actions often are driven by love, but without the knowledge of what the actual right thing to do is. And in a situation where everybody feels profoundly vulnerable, and one person is perceived to have lost a lot of power and a lot of ground in the process of a diagnosis. So the upside of that is that fundamentally we're calling on people who have really good values. And I think by raising awareness, making sure people have information, that we take a much more compassionate and affirming approach to focusing on good health, focusing on what people can do, focusing on the skills, focusing on quality of life, then there's a big prize at the end of that. We have no time to lose, and the next, every minute counts, but then it's going to take 10 to 20 years to really deliver upon it. Just going back over here, you're talking about somebody at 67 being an early diagnosis. Would you care to speculate what the age of the youngest person I've ever met with a form of dementia was? Any advances on 20? 11. It was a little boy of 11. Now that's a very rare thing, but actually we are seeing increasing numbers of people in their 30s, 40s, 50s with forms of dementia, and in particular people with Down syndrome. And I see George here in the audience as well today. People with Down syndrome are at particular risk of developing dementia in their 30s and 40s, or Alzheimer's disease specifically. So we have a job of work to do.
Are there any other comments or contributions people want to make? I know there's a lot of.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if you had any thoughts about the living environment for people with dementia. Should they be living in, if they have to leave their own home and move into, let's say, supported living, should it be in a mixed economy of older people without dementia and dementia, or should we be specifically targeting dementia services?
Okay. I think your question is a very good one. I think that the decisions that would be made in respect of any one individual needs to be driven by an individual very comprehensive assessment for that person. What I would say to you is we need to prioritise alternatives to nursing and residential care, because that's our mindset. So we need to not rule them out, but we need to focus on other things. We have, I'm going to show you these, and they are at the back, and we're giving them away free. Normally you pay £7.50 for each one of them, but you're getting them here for nothing. The information in these books is written in such a way as specifically for people with dementia and their carers themselves. GPs take that wholesale because they really like it in terms of good quality information. And this one is about adapting somebody's own home to help them for longer. Now, the reality of it is not necessarily everybody is going to be able to stay at home for a very long time or be able to stay at home till the end of life. But by shoring up community infrastructure, we can really help that to happen. There is a bit in between that is worthwhile investigating, and again I think that Northern Ireland can do an awful lot more to develop, and that is about supported living. We have some of the best schemes in the UK here, and some of them are in Belfast, and I'll draw particular attention to two that are run with Belfast Trust and Clonmel Housing Association, which is Mullinmuse and Sydenham Court. Other housing associations also, Helm, Trinity and so on, are also developing the kind of schemes whereby people can live in a domestic setting but with support, either individually in their own little flat, but in a scheme that's designed to support them with staff who are properly trained, understand, skilled, able to communicate, have the right expectations for people with dementia, and so on. Or in the case of Mullinmuse, where they are communal series of terrace houses, 5 people in a little community, functions as a domestic home, lovely dining room running on from the kitchen, leading out to a garden. These people grow their own vegetables, they go to the market, and then they cook and eat together. So it functions like a family. And I can tell you, they are maintaining people at really quite an advanced stage of dementia very well in those environments for a long time. And we don't have enough of that.
We actually have, I work in the Northern Trust, we actually have a place called The Brook in Coleraine, which is a 55-place scheme, which has a mixed economy of flatlets and a main block where people have en suites.
Is Brook with?
It's Fold, yes.
It's Fold, yeah. Who are one of the other
One
big
of the things
players
we've been thinking about recently is, in terms of supported housing, is having like a mixed economy of perhaps older people, married couples, single people, and within that economy having facility or enhanced facility for people with dementia. And it's only from my own personal perspective, when I speak to some of my friends and colleagues who are older, there seems to be almost like a concern about, well, how many people with dementia would there be? If I had a bungalow here and I didn't have dementia, how would I fit into that, service? And I think that's maybe part of this attitudes. People see it as people with dementia being separate from older people. I liked your statement earlier on. We're all on that path. We're all travelling, and we're all going to meet the same destination eventually. But I think it's just a case of changing that perception
and challenging some of the concerns that people have. The upside is people can live and age in place. The upside is a couple can stay together. The number of schemes that you come across that couldn't even accommodate a double bed. As though it is a shocking thing to think that somebody might remain being a sexual being to the end of their days. Or that very precious relationship they've had for a long time doesn't matter anymore. Or that there isn't still time to form a new one. More to the point, I think it's maybe time I stop.
I think. Sorry, gentlemen, just one last question then before we split.
Yes, just very briefly. I don't, excuse me, I don't want to repeat something that may have been said already, but I didn't hear what the first speaker was saying. But I was doing some research among carers, and polled at the number of people who when they had an early diagnosis for their spouse of Alzheimer's, the consultant didn't refer them to where they could get information about what was in store for them as carers.
Yeah, and I think it's parallel journeys for people at that time, as a parallel journey through something that has a common thread of the impact of a diagnosis like this, or a condition, living with this condition. And you're right, I mean, carers are so fundamental to the whole package, because there's such alchemy, such synergy, really. And
they were being left to encounter
Yeah.
each of the behavioural manifestations without any forewarning, you know.
Yeah.
So they were.
But you know, Geraldine, and people with dementia too, I would say, you know, are also been left without information and without that. And the underpinning thing that I would reinforce again, you can't separate out fully the needs of carers from the needs of people with dementia. One never takes precedence over the other. We need to get people shored up and properly informed. Those bonds are incredibly important. They are incredibly protective. They're incredibly sustaining for people through to the longer term. And we need to do an awful lot more work around it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I see our sandwiches have come in, and I know